Hello. So I'm going to get us started. We got a couple people still come in. That's all right. Today we're keeping on with our biodiversity. We kind of unceremoniously smashed into sharks at the end there. So in lab next week, we're going to be talking a lot about some of the most important anatomical adaptations and evolutionary events that happened in, like, I'm going to say early vertebrate evolution, but what that really means is like early fish evolution. Some of the stuff with the jawless fishes, cartilaginous fishes, the evolution of jaws and teeth. Some of the most important structural features of vertebrates happen back in the couple of nodes that we talked about on Tuesday. So in those parts of the tree, there's some stuff we really want to focus on. And in lab, I'm probably going to do a little more shark biodiversity stuff because I felt like I got rushed at the end, and I know I did that to myself, but there's so many interesting things to talk about with those animals. But because I've structured this way, I've structured this, there's like no time to look backwards, because now we have the bony fishes. You are a bony fish. The organisms on this slide right here are all bony fish. And as you guys know from that like pie chart thing we saw on the first day, so many of the species diversity of vertebrates today are these ray-finned bony fishes. So both today and next Tuesday is like bony ray-finned fish bonanza, because that's so much. It's a little bit insulting that, like, you know, I'm going to give so much time to amphibians, no offense to amphibians, or give some time to mammals when there's so many more species of these fishes. All right, so here's our phylogeny, just to refresh you, just to get you back in the zone of our monophyletic vertebrata. Vertebrates split, the basal split in vertebrates is between cyclostomes and gnathostomes amongst the stuff today. So today we're talking all about some gnathostomes. Those are jaw-mouthed vertebrates. On Tuesday, we did talk about chondrichthyans, which is one half of the gnathostome split. So those are the cartilaginous fish, like the ratfish and the ray and the shark. But now we're going up to osteichthyes. Oste is bone. You guys know that word, osteoporosis, osteology, things like that. Osteichthyes are the bony fishes. So there's all the context there, but I'm going to make all that go away because you don't need to worry about that at all today. So the osteichthyes, the bony fishes, are a group of gnathostomes and of course are a group of vertebrates. And there's a split between the lobe-finned and the ray-finned fishes. And we're going to be talking about the ray-finned fishes today. Every single one of these bony fishes, including you, including that goldfish, share these 3 vertebrate synapomorphies with all these other animals and these 6 gnathostome synapomorphies with these animals and everybody else. Talk to your neighbors just really quick. What are those 6? What are those 3? Keeping it fresh. All right, what are the vertebrate synapomorphies? What is this lamprey and this frog? 3 things that they share from their common ancestor. Notochord, at least ancestrally, or when they're little baby embryos. Okay, notochord. A spinal cord or dorsal hollow nerve cord is the technical word for it. Dorsal hollow nerve cord, and then last one. Oh, sail tail. At least when their embryos are babies, a lot of them lose that tail. All right, how about the gnathostomes? So lampreys and hagfish no longer have that, where they never evolved these 6 things. What are these 6 things for the jawed vertebrates? Jaws and teeth, and there's little cute pairs here, right? Jaws and teeth, outside, inside. No, I'm gonna mess with you and let you know for real that, like, I could have put dorsal fins as a synapomorphy, but I didn't. There's a ton, there's a million, but I didn't give you guys that. Paired pectoral fins, paired pelvic fins, teeth, jaws, and then an endoskeleton that's mineralized. And they also have a kind of exoskeleton, whatever they call it that though, a dermal skeleton. They have some scales that are made of hard mineralized tissue. So ancestrally, an internal and an external hard tissue, a teeth or jaw with teeth in it, and then pectoral fins and pelvic fins. I'm doing this because I'm cheating and going far ahead and letting you guys know that those are homologies, but go ahead.
We said the dorsal haulders, no.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Some of those chordate, those are the three postnatal tail and dorsal hollow nerve cord and notochord are chordate characters. So there's invertebrates that have those. Thank you very much, Andy. That's right. Oh, that's why we do this. Those three that was just said were all the chordate characters. So I could put an Amphioxus and tunicate right here, and those would go down here. So what are these three for vertebrates? Thank you for catching that. I should have thought that. Vertebrae, a tripartite brain and a skull around it. Thank you for catching that. That's the this is slippery, right? That's why I asked you guys because I wanted you to kind of try it. And here I am being like, sounds good. But it's wrong. Sorry, that's my bad. I should pay more attention. All right, now we're going up into these osteichthyans. Please remember, I didn't give you any cyclostome characters. I didn't give you too many, but I gave you some chondrichthyan characters and then some polycephalin characters and some melasma brain characters. So I gave you characters here and here and here too, but they're not on there because we're not talking about them today. We're talking about osteichthyans today. So for osteichthyans, I've got 4 for you. I bet you can guess what the bony fishes are going to have as their first important synapomorphy. Bones. And so I don't mean just like bone in some vague way, like a cartoon of a dog chewing on a bone. I mean something very specific. I mean endochondral bone. So endo is inside and chondral is referring to a cartilaginous precursor. So endochondral bone is bone that in the organism is formed completely out of cartilage. And then after it is formed with cartilage, other cells come through and deposit the mineral structure and chemical structure of bone. So there's a cartilaginous precursor to endochondral bone. And importantly, every bone in your skeleton is not an endochondral bone. We're going to talk about this in lab. It's pretty crazy, and it's really interesting to see. But your skull bones, and actually your clavicle, your collarbone, are ossifications. They are things we would call bones, but they're not endochondral bone. They're not preformed in cartilage. If you guys have had a child, or if you have a niece or a nephew or a brother or sister, whatever, you know babies have like a soft head. There is no preformed cartilage skull that then ossifies. The bones are actually growing like this in the skull. So only in you, this is a hilarious cartoon, isn't it? Like these are all just 4 femur. I just got this because I liked how simple it was, but like it's pretty bad. But anyway, this is trying to show you that your pectoral girdle, for the most part, your pelvic girdle completely, your vertebrae, your arms and your legs are all endochondral elements, but your skull and some of your pectoral girdle are dermal elements. That's really weird, but when we see lab on Monday, we talk some more about fishy fish, that's going to make sense. It's super bizarre and super interesting. This is something that like medical people were able to know for hundreds and hundreds of years, that like skull bones are different than like your arm. And that is something that is very cool. So I'm going to show you a picture of a human fetus. It's a medical specimen, just so you can see the bone is stained red. And so this is kind of a great example of what we're talking about here. All of the bones in this little person below the head, and not including the collarbone, are endochondral. They're preformed in cartilage. A lot of you already know this, like babies are so smushy. Their bones are there, but they are not ossified yet. They're not the hard mineral structure of bone yet. So endochondral bone, where a complete humerus forms in cartilage and then gets mineralized, that is an osteichthyan, bony fish synapomorphy. Other kinds of bone exist, like these cranial bones that we say are intramembranous. The bone just kind of grows in this layer of the dermis. We're going to talk about this on Monday. I know it's kind of weird. What I think is really cool about this is that we can see this across all osteichthyans. It's always the same. And so here's a fossil of a fish. The endochondral bone is what you get. A fish's axial and almost all, but not quite all, because of the pectoral girdle, of the appendicular skeleton. So you guys remember from lab, the axial skeleton is the backbone, the ribs, and the appendicular skeleton is like the arms and the legs with fins. And so almost all of this fish is formed by endochondral bone, except for parts of the gill structure and the head, which are made of these intramembranous bones. So they're kind of a different structure of bone, they grow in a different way. So there's you in a really bad cartoon, and here's a fish having these two different kinds of bones. The synapomorphy I care about for you guys for bony fishes is this endochondral bone, which means bone that is preformed in cartilage. Sharks, you guys know very well, do not have bone. You guys all learned that probably when you were quite young, but they do have cartilage. So we're going to talk about it in the lab, but something that is almost certainly what happened is that sharks stopped ossifying, but they kept the cartilage and they did something else, which is really interesting. Okay. That's one synapomorphy for bony fishes. Now that we have dermal bones, so bones in the skull that are not endochondral, dermal bones, those dermal bones are what support the teeth. In the shark, there's a cartilage that the teeth are fused onto that is not at all the same thing as what you have. Your teeth are fused to bone, and the same is true for any bony fish. Last week in lab, that lab was called bony skeletons. So we only had bony vertebrates in lab last week. We didn't have any soft stuff. And so the three bones that support teeth are the same across so many of these bony vertebrates. There's a pre-maxilla, which is up here in the front. You actually don't have one. Humans are weird. A maxilla, which is where all your upper teeth are, and a dentary, which is where all the like main marginal teeth are. So many vertebrates that aren't mammals have crazy teeth all over their mouth in different places. We'll talk about that. But this iguana and you having teeth in your maxilla and teeth in your dentary, those teeth being implanted there is a synapomorphy and shared. Like this fish, this gar has teeth in its dentary, and the common ancestor of you and this iguana and this gar all have that in common, at this common ancestor of all bony fishes. This is about the fins. This is another important synapomorphy. All osteichthyans, bony fishes, have what are called lepidotrichia that make up their fins, their tail fin, their dorsal fin, all their pectoral and pelvic fins, lepidotrichia. And so lepidotrichia are these teeny little segments. They're bony, they're derived from scales, they're a kind of scale, so from the dermal bones. And they go out in these long fin rays, and they sometimes branch. If any of you have an aquarium or a fish that you can look at today or tomorrow or whenever, go ahead and look, and you'll see this structure. So these are made of like dermal scale bones. They're very long, they're extremely flexible. There's a very light webbing between these structures. This gives, you might imagine in terms of like locomotion and display and all kinds of things, this is a huge adaptive thing for bony vertebrates. One of the characters I gave you on purpose, of course, for the cartilaginous fishes was ceratotrichia, which was a keratin, a protein-derived fin ray. Like a shark's fin ray is just like a rod. It's not made of a bunch of little pieces, and those rods are really tightly woven together. So a shark has like a triangle, whereas a goldfish can like stop and then sit there and do stuff. So these lepidotrichia are a feature for all bony vertebrates. Lastly, but absolutely not least, this is probably the best one, even though it's going to be stupid for you to write it. I'll let you write it before I talk about it. The foregut diverticulum. So this is some soft tissue anatomy, some internal anatomy that unites all bony fishes, all osteichthyans. So, what do you think foregut is? You just had to guess. You can throw a dart or like a stick figure. Where do you think the foregut is? Up here in the front of your gut. So your gut starts here technically and ends back here. The front, the fore part of your gut. And so all osteichthyans have a diverticulum, a diversion. Here's a developing foregut diverticulum in an embryo. There's an offshoot. This is the main endoderm lined digestive tract that goes out the back of the animal. There's a diverticulum that forms. It swells and it branches off. This tube gets called the esophagus, and the one that lays just next to it, I'm going to say, because it actually moves around, is the trachea. And so these foregut diverticula become the lungs. And so here on this picture, we have a frog and a minnow. A minnow is a little ray fin fish, right? And they both have a mouth. They both can take in air or water and then pass down into the digestive system. Here, pass down into their digestive system. But they both have this diversion that goes up into this structure up here in the fish, and this structure right here in the frog. In the frog, and in all the tetrapods, and in a lot of other things, you would call that diverticulum a lung. There's a reason you guys might die by choking to death. It's because your food tube and your air tube are the same tube at first before they split. So that's a reason choking is a possibility. Your food has to pass like over the entryway to your trachea, to your lungs. That's a thing that happened in like fish evolution, and we have inherited it. So I hope some of you are sitting here thinking about, well, like, wait a minute then, are you telling me that like that fish has a lung? And that is exactly what I am telling you. The common ancestor of all the bony vertebrates, every bony fish absolutely positively had a functional lung. Take in air from the atmosphere. They definitely have gills. They're breathing, they're having water pass over their gills, and they're drawing oxygen from the water, no question. They also can take in air from the surface, pass it into this lung, and get oxygen from that. Many of the early diverging groups of bony fishes, including some of these rayfin fishes, can and do still breathe. This is a tarpon in Florida. It's a big sport fish you can catch. All you have to do is sit there at the dock and watch, especially in like brackish waters, like in a bay or an estuary. They routinely come up to the surface and gulp. And that's a rayfin fish because they can get oxygen from the air in their lung structure. So this trout has this structure here. What is so weird, and we're going to talk about it, is that a lot of these rayfin fishes, the majority of the vertebrate diversity that's fishes, don't use their lung thing, as a lung. They use it as a structure we call a swim bladder for buoyancy. They keep air in it, but it's a buoyancy thing. They totally breathe with their gills. They do not breathe with their swim bladder. But they still retain this structure that is connected to the digestive tract and is ancestrally a lung. This is a lobefin fish. We'll talk about them late next week. A lung fish. Lung fishes are closer to you than they are to any other kind of fish. They absolutely are called lung fishes because all they do is go up there and taste some air and breathe. And so something that I think is really cool, if I go back all the way, is that these characters here, endochondral bone, teeth, condermal bones, lepidotrichia, and then ancestral lung. This thing, obviously you probably knew all these things, and then a lot of these things ancestrally have the ability to breathe air. Most people think ability to breathe air probably goes like here, and only those things do it. It's not true. Really cool. I'm sure you might have questions about that. Okay, you can trust me. Okay.
Evolutionary gills developed first and then a lung.
Oh yeah, those gills are way back in like all those deuterostomes have gills. So gills are first. And so being, what is happening in these tissues, this gut-lined tissue, all it is like really soft cells that are good at osmosis for digesting, taking in the nutrients, taking in the minerals, taking in the water, whatever it is from the digestive system. So there's a huge amount of cell membrane there that's all about taking stuff out of what's passing through. And so this diverticulum, we think, now we're getting into paleo world, and I shouldn't, but the like adaptations of osteichthyans in their habitats in like swampy environments where there's relatively low oxygen in the water, breathing air becomes something that like, okay, you could do that for a while. Okay. All right, now we're taking a right. We're not going to talk about these guys today, the Sarcopterygians, which you are a Sarcopterygian. We're taking a right. We're spending today and all of Tuesday up here with all these fishes, Actinopterygians. So these Actinopterygians are, of course, bony fishes. They have jaws, they have vertebrae, right? They all fit in there. So I'm not going to give you any characters for Actinopterygii because there's so many of them. There are a handful of like anatomical characters that unite them, but they're so boring and I don't even want you to care. Look them up if you want to. But trust me, there's a couple. Actinopterygii. Here's what you guys saw on the first day of class. I've actually updated this. I have like a much more recent, like a 2021 textbook. And so I went in there and just like trusted their numbers instead of betting everything against the literature. So it might be a little bit different. But so this was 68,000 like 2 weeks ago when I showed it to you. But this is the updated 2021 textbook numbers, just so you have them. So we've already talked about lampreys and hagfish up there and ratfishes on Tuesday and sharks and rays just for a hot second on Tuesday. Now we're going to talk about Actinopterygians, like so much vertebrate diversity. 34,600 at least specimens as of, or sorry, species as of 2021. Now, when you guys saw this, I think it was Addison, but it was somebody up here in the front was like, well, sure, the world is so oceany. Of course, there's gonna be so many fishes. That makes sense. There's only 30% land, 70% water. So Earth planet is gonna have a lot of fish. But there's a lot more to it than that. Of those 34,000, whatever, 600 species of actinopterygians, half of them almost, it oscillates, I swear, between 49, 51, 50, 49, 50. How many percentages based on like people doing research as we find new species of actinopterygians actually live in fresh water, and half of them actually do live out in salt water in the oceans. So that's 70% of Earth's surface that is salt water. Only half of the species of actinopterygians actually live there. The other half lives in fresh water. This is insane because fresh water, like all the lakes and all the streams and all the ponds and all the wetlands, all totaled up into a big ball of water, is only 0.008% of all the water on the surface of the planet. 96.5% of the water on the planet is the ocean. And then most of the rest of this is groundwater and glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland. So only this much of the actual swimmable water is in lakes and rivers, but that volume of water contains almost half of the species of rayfin fishes. Get what I'm saying? It's upsetting, I think. All right, have a little conversation time. You are biologists. What are possible factors influencing, I'm gonna say, the seemingly absurdly high number of freshwater fish species that exist? We'll talk a little bit. Can you guys do me a favor? I like this question. I like what I'm hearing. Can, like, you guys talk as like a larger level of people, and you guys talk as a larger level of people. What things are we talking about? What you all do? Yeah, okay. So massive, but there's lots of reasons that it's all. Obviously, there's always probably just all simple. Plus. Why? More and more separate yeah, whatever. All right, can I get some volunteers from the different groups? What are your groups talking about?
You were talking about how like lakes kind of are like separate from each other, so you get a lot of like flow between.
Oh. In those systems, there's maybe like reduced gene flow. If I'm like a butterfly fish and I'm like exit sperm, and I live in Maui, and those sperm wash up in the Philippines, and like, hey, look at that species in both places. That's very different than if you're stuck in the Portneuf River. Okay, what else? Yeah,
Incredible amount of diversity there is amongst different environments.
oh, say more about that, what do you mean?
Like, you have lakes, you have rivers, you have wetlands, you have like, you know, brackish environments, you have anaerobic environments and whatnot. In freshwater.
I'm gonna call that habitat heterogeneity.
Yeah, versus the ocean that has like really functionally more like four sort of different environments that you.
Okay, so yeah, there's fish species, there's species of all kinds of things, aquatic plants, amphibians, of course, all kinds of things in like a river that are adapted to like very specific parts of the river, rapids, cool pools, shaded areas, open, big flowing parts. Okay, so there's a lot more, it's very chopped up. What are the things? What are you guys talking about?
We have a lot of the same.
The same thing.
Yeah, just these two though, reduced G flow and habitat heterogeneity?
Yeah, when we're talking about the ocean, it covers a very large portion of the earth, but it's very similar from Arctic to tropic.
Hmm.
The pelagic area is just very homogeneous, but very large, so there's less reason for things to differentiate.
A really fun thing to think about is like, if you're like a species of freshwater fish in like the Mississippi River, you have this huge ability to go all over this one continent, maybe. You can go up to Ohio, you can go up to Missouri, Montana, you do all that stuff. But like the Great Lakes are, you can't get there unless you leave, go around Florida, go all the way back up, right? Whereas, yeah, in the ocean, there's currents. There is ultimately, if you reduce it down enough, one gigantic global current that goes all over the world. And so if you're just a population, you know, maybe you're riding sea turtles for a minute, but if you're just a population moving around the ocean, it's very easy to disperse. Dispersal routes are high. Something that like pinned with this, I would say, is like there's really high vicariance. You guys remember that word? Geographic split with populations, vicariant events. I want to show you, I think, a really cool thing that is true. We in Idaho do not have like a particularly incredibly diverse freshwater fish population or situation, but we do have a few. And so that's true for the American West as well. And something I want you guys to think about is like change. The ocean as the ocean, okay, fine. This is a map of the Western US with ice and water, fresh water, sometimes brackish water, sometimes inland seas that never drain out, like the Salt Lake. This is how big the Salt Lake used to be. It's like during the Ice Age, as a biologist, if you're imagining a fish, what's going on in every single one of these little lakes and these riverways that are sometimes connected, sometimes not connected, coming and going, isolation, gene flow, all kinds of stuff like that. This is a very excellent map from like one of the most recent of the times the earth was glaciated like this. But during the Ice Age, which we are still technically in, ice came and went like 40 times. So you had like ice on Seattle and then not, and then again, and then not, and then again, and then not. Ice at Arco and Salmon again, and then not again, and then not again, and then not. So not on this map. Talk to each other for a minute about this map and send me some cool things you might notice.
So a lot of these, you know. Yeah.
All right, what are some things we're noticing? Things we could talk about? I know the Idaho conversation always is about the Lake Bonneville and the flood and everything like that, but every time I see maps of the Ice Age, I'm always like, man, no fish here in the Mojave, outside Vegas. You guys want to go boating? Like, not really, except for on a dam we built right there, right there. But that's not what this is. Anybody know anything about these little lakes? And what they look like now? There's a kind of fish, there's a couple kinds of fish that are hyper critically endangered, and the government like watches every individual. There's little fishes called pupfish, and they are like the remnants of these giant lakes, and they live in like 4 inches of water in the Mojave Desert, like under a tree. It's really crazy. Okay, and what other things, what are people noticing you're talking about?
The lakes are not really connected by rivers.
Everything in here. And I bet you guys have heard this before because you're Idaho people. This is the Great Basin. It doesn't drain to the ocean almost at all. So actually, I should have drawn the line like this. Of course, this thing does. That's what makes Lake Bonneville so crazy, why you guys will know about it, because it just got so full that it like busted out into a drainage to the ocean. But most of this doesn't drain out at all. This is like the Dead Sea in Israel or something, or the Aral Sea in Asia. It's just a salty because of the rocks, inland kind of water system. What else are we talking about? We've had their hand up.
I was just gonna say, I think flooding events like the Bonneville flood could deposit species across an area.
Directionally though, right? What's the direction of that deposition?
They float north towards Pocatello.
Sure. But like, where do you guys, just as a default, would you expect there to be more fish species? Here in the Columbia or here or here? Because like, this is the very, very tippy top of this is high elevation, right? And so I agree with you, probably fishes can get deposited that maybe live here but don't live there when a flood happens. But how are you gonna get up here if you're fish in this place? So like, you guys probably know, Twin Falls is what we would call a barrier to dispersal, right? The falls, it's Shoshone Falls. There's no fishes that are 80 feet. There's a huge disconnect in Idaho's fish biodiversity at a waterfall. It's a physical feature. So there's all kinds of things like that to think about. Here's another thing I think is fun. This is a poster you can buy at like museums or online. This is freshwater fishes of North America. And a simple point I want to make to you here is, if I take away a couple of them, so I took away a stingray, a sawfish, a bull shark, and all the lampreys under that bigger X. Every single other freshwater fish of North America is an actinopterygian fish. Is anybody here an angler, person who like knows some fish stuff? A little bit? Anyway, talk to each other for like 2 seconds. What jumps out to you about this poster? I like posters like this where there's like a bit of a size and diversity thing put together. There's no details here I want you to get, but what do you notice about this? Just chat for a second. All right, give me like 1 or 2 things, real quick. Anything?
We discussed the colorful like grouping.
Oh, yes, these colorful grouping, AKA invasive cichlids. Mostly in Florida, mostly because people were like, whatever, and just threw them in the water. Those are invasive. They're mostly African and South American. Sorry. I like this poster because it's not like the fish of North America and then pretends it's like 1850. It's like, no, this is like what you're actually gonna find. Bunch of invasive stuff.
We talked about how there's only one big fish.
Oh, this big sturgeon.
Yeah.
Big sturgeon. We're gonna talk about sturgeon. We know what sturgeon are. How about the fact that like some of the boxes, this is the box that we would call carps and minnows. It's humongous. Pretty cool. All right, no, we're gonna spend time on this. The next like rest of this is gonna be all actinopterygian biodiversity. It's gonna be a real nightmare. I don't know. You write down what you want to write down. Again, the point of this is to give you guys exposure to animals so you can think about projects, think about following your own interests. And so I will put this on there just so like when you're looking at the slides on Moodle, you can be like, okay, as I'm scrolling, because it's hard to like remember it all. I apologize when you see this, okay? I just made it because I think it's cool. These are some actinopterygian diversity of what I would say are fishes I bet you maybe kind of know a little bit or you've seen before. At least you've seen them before. Really quick, talk to each other about, this is an actinopterygian phylogeny that's very, very, very recent and very exciting for reasons I'll talk about in a second. If you don't know all these fishes, it's no big deal. So you're not supposed to, but you might know a couple. Go ahead and look.
And there.
Yeah.
I don't.
Probably several.
All right, what are some observations, some questions? I did this without a biology once, it was a real nightmare, so that's why I made a biology.
Freshwater has evolved like multiple times over the.
Oh, okay, say more about that, what do you mean?
Like, there's a bath down there, and that's like in a bunch of saltwater, in between a bunch of saltwater fish. And then you also have eels, paddlefish, cars, sturgeon, carp, all of them evolved freshwater.
Okay, so maybe we could infer multiple invasions of the freshwater. I'd also note that by saying that, you're already implying a saltwater ancestor. What are the freshwater ancestors? Anyway, just thing to think about, love it, that's how you should think about trees. What other things? Yeah,
There are some surprising, relatives there.
yeah, there are, please tell me why.
The seahorse and the tuna.
Thank you very much. Gigantic, fastest fish in the sea versus like hanging out, doesn't move very much. Pregnant boys. Seahorses and tuna. Now, of course, there's a huge diversity of fishes in an order that contains seahorses and a huge diversity of fishes in an order that contains tuna, but those are sisters. Hilariously, for a long time, these relationships, especially of these types of fishes, this last half of the slide, have been totally messy. Morphology, anatomy, paleontology can put groups together. We got all the tunas in a pile, awesome. Got all the seahorses in a pile, got all the flounders in a pile. Nobody's worried about it. But then when it becomes the interrelationships of those bigger groups, anatomy and paleontology and morphology, we're starting to not be able to answer those questions. And so it's only been in the last 20 some years that genetics helped answer those questions. And guess who got to go first? Mammals. Guess who got to go next? Birds. This phylogeny and others like it are like 2021, 2018, 2019, very recent. These people do mitochondria, these people do proteins, trying to get at these higher levels, what we'd say fish phylogeny. Everybody knows all the anglerfish go together. That's not hard. But then who does the anglerfish go with? Okay, and now we have these answers. These, I'm giving you guys, I really had to parse a lot out of here, some of the most robust relationships. I'm telling you all that because you're going to see it a bunch of times in the next couple of weeks. This is one of those ones that is just beloved. Because genetics is like, seahorses go with tunas. And everyone's like, nah. And then it's like 100 more times. Seahorses go with tunas. And so the anatomy people have to be like, and look into it. And then there's like little structures in the operculum. There's little structures in the first couple neck vertebrae. And you're like, oh my God, that's important. And seahorses go with tunas. It's fantastic. These different lines of evidence complementing each other. All right, what other things?
They all look very different. It's not one fish that has similar fins or, they all are very.
I don't know how many times I've said this to you already, but every comparative anatomy class is like, anyway, fish, and then they talk about frogs. It's like, no. All kinds, easily. If you're a person who's an evolutionary biologist and you want to study ecomorphology, like how in specific pieces of morphology interact with an ecosystem, if you want to understand radiations amongst vertebrates, you're not studying like big cats or parrots or something. You're studying like just some parrotfish because there's 400 of them and they all have a super specialization that's crazy. Fishes have a ton of incredible morphological diversity. There's like a big joke in people who study vertebrates, so that's me, paleontology, whatever. It's always like, yeah, you might like dinosaurs. Yeah, you might like mammals, but sooner or later, you're going to become a fish person. And it's just like, yeah, you are. You're like, whoa, because it's just so much cool stuff. Okay, brace yourselves. Okay, guess what? You're not responsible for any of that. You're not responsible for any of that. You only have to know this one. which is the common ancestor, Actinopterygium, the whole clade. You are not responsible for any of this. I'm putting this on the slide as your reference because the taxonomy and these clade names are so new that if you guys go to like Wikipedia, they're not going to be there or they're barely going to be there. I want you guys to be like tip of the spear 2023. Here's the names that are good. Come back in 10 years. Those names will be everywhere. But right now they're like very hot and fresh. So they're there for your reference. You do not need to know. Actually, that's not true. There's one besides Actinopterygium. There's two besides Actinopterygium you do have to know, but we'll get there. Okay, let's talk about Actinopterygium biodiversity. It's going to feel a lot like what we just did with vertebrate biodiversity. So here is the actual distribution of extant living Actinopterygians. It's a phylogeny. This number here is telling you the number of genera, so a genus in each group. So there's 2 genera of this fish, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4,500 plus. So these groups, we're going to talk about really quickly because they're very, very ancient and it's very, very cool that they're still alive. And of course, they tell us a lot about fish evolution. These are the ones, and I'll talk about it specifically, that still breathe with their air lungs. Don't have like a swim bladder. So we'll talk about that. Here's what those fishies are. There's these things called polyptriformes or the bichurs. These are freshwater little guys in Africa. I'm going to do their diversity here in a second, just to give you some pictures. You probably haven't heard of those. You maybe have heard of this clade, which has fish like the paddlefish, which is a big filter feeding fish with this crazy long rostrum that can like electro-sense, it can sense electrical signals. And then things like sturgeon. Sturgeon are one of the big fish of Idaho. Sturgeon are also the fish that lays the eggs that we get to call caviar. Caviar comes from sturgeons. Sturgeons are kind of the classic, like, oh, that's a dinosaur fish for sure, because it like has armor and looks crazy. And it's an ancient fish. It predates dinosaurs, of course, but it is very much a living organism. There's many species still today. A couple species of these fishes called gar. These are freshwater predators with really long snouts full of teeth. They sit there and they sit and wait and grab stuff. There's a couple species of this fish called bowfin that only live in the US of A. Only alive anymore in America, but their fossil record goes back really far. And then of course, the whole rest of Actinopterygium diversity is this clade here called Teleos, and that's a clade we're going to talk about quite a lot. And there's your little seahorse emblem. So there's my picture version of like 8 species, 25 species, 34,000 species of Teleos. So very much, I bet you can imagine, there's some morphological and important adaptations that are true for Teleos that we are going to get into. So before we jump into the Teleos though, let's talk about these early groups of fishes. So these are groups of ray fin fishes. Most of them have pretty excellent fossil records. This one goes back almost 400 million years. This one's in the mid 300 million years. This one is just shy of 250 million years of divergence. This one, and this one relative to all the rest. So like I said, these are very ancient fishes. The first one are these fishes here. They're called reedfish or bichurs. I'm going to show you a picture of them. Actually, I'll put this one up too. Now stop. Forget this dumb fish, forget the goldfish, forget the seahorse. The goldfish and the seahorse are teleost. This living organism that lives in the lakes and rivers of Africa, there's 12 of them. This lineage is sister to every single other fishy thing that you think about. So maybe it lets us know something about the common ancestor of all these osteichthyans, all these ray-finned osteichthyans. This fish is a weirdo. So tell me about bichurs. It's a snake. Let's go. Let's go for it.
Very long.
All right, I'll take any observations you guys have about beachers and reed fish. There's really only one reed fish, which is so long, and the rest of them are called beachers, but give me some observations about these guys. And gals.
They have like a forward facing eyes, probably Victoria.
Oh, yeah, when it looks at you straight on, you can see both of its eyes. It looks like a voracious killer, doesn't it? All right, forward facing eyes a little bit, or a little, yeah, I'm gonna say interior vision, it probably has some. That's an observation we can make. What other observations can we make?
Are they walking on their bed?
Oh my God, tell me more. What's this? What's this? You know what this is? What's this? What's this? Yeah, that's a pectoral fin. Going on in this picture, does it look like? During locomotion week, am I gonna show you a GIF of a beacher being like on the bottom of its fish tank, like in somebody's house? Yeah. It's not walking because it's in water. Its body is suspended. It's neutrally buoyant, but it is like. And it's a fish. It's a ray fin, bony fish. It's on the goldfish seaboard side of things. And here's this one in its tank walking around a little bit. Okay. Other things.
There's multiple doors to fence, but like the beachers do, reed fish.
I think the reed fish doesn't have dorsal fin at all, lost. And then the beachers, yeah, one of the features that unite them is it developmentally when they're little babies, it's just a dorsal fin, and then as they grow up, they go like, and they can do cool stuff with it. It's all signaling and display. Don't worry about that too much. What other things can we see? That doesn't look like a fish, right? Like, that's not that face. It's kind of, I think it's like a salamander kind of face. It's low and flat, it's bony, it's rigid. There's not a bunch of crazy mouth stuff. It just has a mouth. This is a very, very, very amazing face to be the earliest diverging group of ray fin fishes. That makes me think the other ones are probably very derived, highly evolved. This one is interesting. Remember this face next Thursday when we're talking about sarcopterygian lungfishes and coelacanths. Okay. Not that fishy a face. Anything else?
The scale pattern.
What about it?
A very thick shapes.
Yes, the scales are super thick. They're hard. They don't overlap. They're just next to each other in like this grid. These fish are not that flexible. There's not a lot of movement. Their scales are heavy and intense. Love that. Thank you all very much. These fishes are freshwater fishes. They live in Africa. Only Africa today. Their fossil record is formerly global, but today there's only a few of them and they live in freshwater in Africa. Cool. Yeah, it's not like I sit there at the surface thing in any special way, but it does breathe. And those tubes are its nostrils. Yeah.
I was gonna say the same thing. Do all species of these breathe air as well?
Yeah, these guys can. All right, the next little jump up the tree, this is what I mean, it's kind of just a lot of stuff. The sturgeon, the paddlefish. Paddlefish are in the US, like in the Mississippi River. These are humongously cool filter feeders. They open their mouth really wide, put water through their mouth and over their gills. Their gills, of course, are used for respiration, but you guys are gonna see a ton in fishes. We didn't get to talk about it with the sharks. On top of the gills that are the tissue that's breathing the gills, there's these things called gill rakers, and the water flashes through those. It's like a comb and it catches all the plankton or shrimp or fish, whatever they're trying to eat. So paddlefishes have these gill rakers. They are toothless filter feeders. There was a species in China that went extinct 3 years ago, dams and habitat destruction. So there's actually, I had to edit the number down because the Chinese paddlefish just got declared extinct recently. The much more famous group in these fishes is the sturgeon. There's 20 some kinds of sturgeon in the world. These are almost all freshwater fishes, although some go into the oceans a little bit. They have their mouths on the bottom of their face, these sensory barbels for feeling around in the gravel and sucking up what their prey are, things like shelled organisms that they crush up. They're very bony in their heads. They've got these lines of armor on their backs. Both these fishes are smooth. They're relatively scaleless. And that's probably a feature just for them. And then the other thing I want to say, just for like the fun fact wise, sturgeon are the animals we get, like I said, caviar from. In Russia, there's a really humongous sturgeon that could be 25 feet long called the beluga sturgeon. That's like supposedly the best caviar. The next bounce up the tree is this clade, which has animals called gars and bowfins. Gars are all New World, mostly North America and a little bit in like the Caribbean and Central America. Gars are predators. They're sit and wait freshwater predators. They live usually in very murky water. They're very still, they're very chill. And then if you get close to them, they can do like a side swipe and grab. So the most famous gar probably is the alligator gar, which is this gigantic, you know, again, dinosaur looking kind of fish. And there are certainly many, many, many gars from the age of dinosaurs that we have fossils for. And so like any fishing TV show, you're going to see someone's going to try to catch an alligator gar because they're so scary and cool looking. Bowfin, again, are another really cool fish. We are going to be dissecting a bowfin in class. We got one, which is really exciting. So this will be our early Actinopterygian. Fun fact about them, because we got too much to talk about. When it's time to, you know, get it on and make babies, the male's fins all turn green. And apparently everybody loves it. That's how you know it's breeding season with its bowfins. Their fins turn green. I want to show you guys something I couldn't resist when I was making the slides today. So gars are sit and wait ambush predators. And so over this last holiday break, I was in Florida and I went to the Everglades and there's tons of gars everywhere. There's a species called the Florida gar that only lives in Florida. And this picture is so funny because this gar is being an ambush predator. I think it thinks it's hiding, but you can judge. It's hiding. Its nose is right here. I saw this gar and I was like, oh, that gar is being real slick. Like it's like waiting for somebody to swim by. But you can see these fishes also have, you can't quite see maybe in the photos, but I wish you could see better. These fishes have extremely intense armor, thick scales, their own kind of chemical structure of the scales we're not going to talk about. Not really overlapping, very rigid. There's not a lot of bendiness in these fishes. So there was our features and reed fish. There was our sturgeons and paddlefish. We just saw gars and bowfin. Gars and bowfin are in this really well-established clade with all the rest of the fishes. So Neopterygii is a real clade. You're not responsible for it, but I put it on there. Now we swing up past these guys into this big, big, big group of fishes where we're going to spend most of our time. These fishes are the Teleos. Teleostae is the actual name of the clade. This is one you are responsible for. Actinopterygia you're responsible for. Teleostae you're responsible for. There's several features that unite all of the Teleos. I'm going to give you three that are ecologically extremely important to their very high biodiversity. The three features of Teleos, the first one I want you to know is that they have what we call a homocercal, C-E-R-C-A-L, not like the shape, homocercal tail. And so all of these fishes have a tail that is even top to bottom in terms of how the vertebrae, how the spinal column interacts with it. So here's this little sunfish that you might catch if you go fishing. Its spinal cord goes like this right through the middle of its body. And then back here at the tail, the spine ends and there's these top to bottom, so dorsal to ventral, symmetrical bones that make this semicircle shape. And the fish tail fin, the caudal fin, is top to bottom, dorso to ventral, symmetrical. That allows for extremely high mobility. Yes, you can use your tail for forward propulsion, but also other things can happen that cannot with other kinds of tails. I could have given you this next thing as a gnathostome character, but I didn't because I said there's too many and I just picked a couple. All gnathostomes ancestrally are characterized by what we would call a hetero. So homo is the same, hetero is different, a heterocercal tail. And in heterocercal tails, which is ancestral for all jawed vertebrates, the vertebral column goes into the tail, up into the top part of the tail, the dorsal lobe of the tail. So here's the shark, an elasmobrake, Chondrichthyon, gnathostome, and its vertebrae go up into its tail lobe. Here is a sturgeon, so a kind of actinopterygian, but a non-teleost actinopterygian, and its vertebrae go all down its back and then again up into the dorsal lobe of the tail. So the sturgeon has Lepidotrichia making its tail fin. The shark has Ceratotrichia making its tail fin, but they both inherited a heterocercal tail from the common gnathostome ancestor. Teleos have a cooler, I'm going to call it, maybe not cooler looking, but fancier tail, more adaptable tail, a homocercal tail. Probably the best of the Teleos characters are what we call pharyngeal jaws. So what that means is bones in the pharynx, bones that are associated with the gill skeleton in Teleos have been co-opted. They've got teeth on them, and they've been co-opted with muscles that only Teleos have to become a second set of jaws way back in the throat. So you have your normal dentary maxilla with the teeth in them, like you guys have, but then down here, there's another set of jaws. And so in something like this, which is a skull of a moray eel, so a big, maybe scary looking eel that's sitting there in a coral reef, that's its face. Deep in its throat, there's another set of jaws. And so maybe we can look it up if we want to when we do diet. The way these eels eat is they grab something and they have it in their mouth. And then after they have it kind of subdued, the pharyngeal jaws will come forward and grab the thing and pull it deeper in. So pharyngeal jaws, especially in these big eels, are particularly fantastic and insane. But every fish that's a teleost has pharyngeal jaws. So here's the eyeball of a skull of like a butterfly fish. You know what we might call the oral jaws? So like the maxilla, the dentary, the teeth you might expect. It still has back here in its gill structure, a set of jaws with teeth on them called pharyngeal jaws. So most fishes can like take food in and then process it like here. There's also a lot of insanely cool things I'm not going to talk about right now that happen with pharyngeal jaws that teleosts use as another way they can diversify. The last feature I want you guys to have for teleosts is that they have a mobile premaxilla. You guys have ever caught a fish, you've probably caught a teleost, and if you've caught a teleost, I'm sure you've seen this. So that bichir, that gar, those bones are all one big thing. The skull just goes mark, 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 and that's it. In a teleost, the maxilla, which is this bone here, has mobility, but then most importantly, that I care you know about, the premaxilla, the bone swings out all by itself and makes that fish face. When people do a fish face, that upper lip is the premaxilla, completely free except for this connection to the rest of the skull. This adaptation, this is a perch living a complete little life. Here's a perch with its premaxilla extended, this mobile premaxilla. By making their mouth volume suddenly much bigger, they create like a vacuum effect. So when they're feeding, they do this, and that just sucks the immediate water into their mouth. They don't even have to like bite onto something effectively. They can suck it in by just opening the mouth and creating a little vacuum. A negative space, the water just fills. And so this little shrimp or this little baby fish or this egg or whatever it is gets sucked into their mouth. So that mobile premaxilla is a dietary adaptation for sure of teleosts that of course gets adapted into all kinds of crazy stuff. Okay, another point I like to make, because you guys are biologists and I think the diversity of today's world is really amazing that we can know where it came from. So this is from my paleontology class. I've edited it down. This is geological time here on the left, 66 million years ago, 150 million years ago, whatever. So there's your bichir, paddlefish sturgeon, gar, bowfin. Those lineages of fishes go way back to like before dinosaur time, and they continue up to the present. Teleosts, as a clade, don't really show up until the Jurassic period, which I know you guys know about. And the actual living groups today, the gray arrows represent like the oldest possible, probably fossils of those living groups. So you guys have already seen this phylogeny a little bit. What I think is so fantastic about this is that there's like families of salamander that are older than like the whole trout radiation, the entire, bass, fancy fish radiation. There's groups of birds, there's groups of mammals that are older than most of the fish diversity you guys know. But most people think of fishes as like the old kinds of life. I just think that's fun. And I want you to see it pictorially, that these gray lines go way back down here to the floor, but teleosts are a relatively new group of fishes. Okay, so another little distraction for you guys that has to do with fish biodiversity. All these grays start right up here at the top. Did anybody know something that happens 66 million years ago? So 66 million years ago, an asteroid hits Mexico and famously kills all the big dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops. What is so fantastic about modern science that you guys have this access to is that we can take all these different lines of evidence and things from world history. And so part of diversity of life is part of that history and talk about it. Here's one of those fish phylogenies from the last few years. It's too much, you don't have to worry about it, but there's pretty pictures up at the top. There's some of the clades that I labeled for you on that figure. There's the fish diversity, how they're related to each other, and then the distance those branches are going is scaled against geological time. So it's today, 20 million years ago, 60 million years ago, 100 million years ago. And then the DNA is used to estimate when these splits happened. That's the asteroid impact. So talk to your neighbors for a second. What effects might an asteroid impact have had on fish diversity?
Like there's some things that go in the past.
Yeah.
All right, this is kind of out of left field and not really appropriate for this class, but I just wanted you guys, I wanted you to have another kind of biology question. What are we talking about? Yes. What ideas are we talking about?
It looks like it kind of exploded diversity of them, like, it was like, there's just a whole bunch more lines after the explosion, like these two must have opened up.
So extinctions almost do an event, like wipe out biodiversity. A lot of stuff dies. What that means for the survivors is there's a ton of open niche space. Tons of fish lineages that are not alive today and so cannot possibly be on this diagram absolutely go extinct. But what we can see here is you can see some of these splits are being estimated as like before the red line. That's because they're based on like just like somebody doing like a DNA analysis and pulling the lever. They're not like calibrating to what might have happened. So some of these are almost certainly in the immediate aftermath of the extinction. I just want to show you guys, this is an extremely good fossil site from a few million years after the extinction, 15 million years after the extinction. Most major groups of fishes are very much suddenly in the fossil record in the 10 million years after the asteroid impact, and they don't exist before that. So here's an eel, there's a stingray, here's these nice big butterfly fish things, here's like a goosefish kind of thing. You might not know all these, that's okay. Tons, like a surgeonfish, like a dory kind of fish. They all show up in the immediate aftermath and not before. I just think that's really fantastic and something to like keep in mind as another angle on fish diversity and where it comes from. The ecological release that allowed teleost to explode and become all the fishes we know. Okay, so there's so many of them. There's way too many teleosts, and I always struggle with how to do this. So we got like a few minutes now, and then the rest of this is basically not me asking you like big questions or giving you too many characters. It's just like, look at all these fish. All right, here it is. You've seen it now. Every fish after this slide belongs in the teleost group. So here's our phylogeny. What I'm going to try to do is give you an idea of where we're floating as we make our way through teleost biodiversity. And so the sister to all the other teleost is this group over here that has animals like eels in it, but certainly it's not just eels in that clade. So there's some nice pictures of some pretty eels. Every time I put one of these up, I'm going to be quiet for a minute just so you can like look at it, take it in. We won't do this for every single one, but just because this is the first one. Any comments and questions? This is gonna be really open and we're gonna do a lot of this, so it's okay if it just kind of is a little loose.
Scary looking.
Gulper ear, eel, eyeballs right here. Mouth goes like this. So the gulper eel is one of the only vertebrates that we know of that can engulf and digest animals actually bigger than its body. So it goes like this. And after a gulper ear catches something, it just has like a way bigger than a pelican pouch that it just keeps for a long time. So gulper eels, halosaurs, snipe eels, these are all deep ocean animals. Some of them are eels. The halosaur is not technically an eel. Some of these are true eels. Morays are the ones that have like the really scary jaws down in their throats. This guy's a hero, feeding his eels in Europe. If you guys don't know about it, like Google eel basement. There's a guy on Twitter that like has a cellar. He like lifts like a sewer grate out of his basement and he goes down a ladder and he's just got a basement like full of eels. Kind of crazy. So eels are everywhere. There are eels in the US, there are eels in the Southeast US that they actually do the reverse of what salmon do. They live their lives in rivers and lakes, but then they go out to the ocean and have their babies, like off of Georgia, North Carolina to the mid-Atlantic. And then those babies come back up into rivers to live. Garden eels are always in aquariums, very popular. They stick their heads up, they live in colonies, they're all very nervous. They pick out pieces of food and they never leave their safe base. This is a tarpon. Tarpon don't really look like they belong with all the eels, but they absolutely do. This is just like a big, scary, cool fish. Tarpon are like a big sport fish in Florida. They're not really good to eat, but people love to catch them. And if you guys want to know something kind of bizarre, like the history of Florida, like sport fishing in like the 1920s for tarpon was like one of the reasons like a bunch of the railroads and highways got built in the first place. Because people wanted to go like have a great time catching tarpon. It's really funny to me. Anyway, we'll talk a lot more about deep sea fishes as we keep going. I want you to notice the fact that like, hey, look at some of these eels live in coral reefs and some of these eels are deep sea organisms. Another tick up the phylogeny is this big clade. This is all South American and African freshwater fishes. Some of these fishes were named when we had our like name some fishes thing on the first day. Go ahead, you can look at this for a second, I'll stop there.
Another back.
That's a big statement. Not to short mix, like, it's like a community about.
All right, so any observations, anything? You can just throw stuff out really. We don't have to be a little, like I said. Elephant fish is fantastic. We're gonna talk about elephant fish late in the semester. Elephant fish are an electric kind of fish. They can produce an electric current. It radiates here, and then they have a bar in their tail. So they have a magnetic field all around their bodies at all times. They actually use it to like talk to each other more than they use it to find things. And so actual mating displays of elephant fishes, the scientists who like stick probes in the water of the Congo River where they all live. And you can just hear like males being like, "Burr, burr, 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 burr." What it is just like they're shooting lightning in like apparently sexy patterns. And then the females respond to it. There's knife fish in Africa, featherbacks in South America. This fish locomotes using only an extremely huge anal fin. This one only an extremely long dorsal fin that it like feathers, so it floats around. Using an anal fin and the featherback, a dorsal fin and the knife fish. Arapaima are one of the biggest freshwater fish in the world. These live in the Amazon. They can be like 8, 9, 10, 12 feet long sometimes. They're very, very big fish. This fish's head looks very flat. When it does the mobile premaxilla thing, it creates like a 4-gallon bucket of space that sucks everything in. So these are awesome, awesome predators. You'll see those at big aquariums. You can see things like arowanas and butterfly fish, all their sensory structures, their barbels, their mouths, their eyes, they stare at the surface and they grab unlucky bugs, unlucky baby birds, unlucky whoever falls into the water, which is really cool. The African butterfly fish also is a great example of one of these fishes that like independently has the ability to glide. You can jump out of the water and they go. Kind of fun. All freshwater fish, these fishes. Because they're in South America and Africa, a lot of these fishes have been used in studies of biogeography when continental drift was like new and controversial. They're like, yeah, how come all these freshwater fish like are only in the Amazon and the Congo and none of them in the Atlantic? And people were like, but then we learned how long ago that happened, and it turns out no way, it couldn't have been that. So there must have been saltwater ones. And guess what? There's fossil saltwater ones. All right. The next node up the tree is this one. Astariophysians. This is an insane group of fishes. Here's your Astariophysi fact. You don't have to know that name, but I'm going to say it. Here's the Astariophysi fact I think you need to know. Almost every single species of freshwater fish is an Astariophysian. These fishes are most freshwater fish species diversity. So yes, there's freshwater fishes over here and down here and in that group, but 80% of freshwater species are in this clade. The first page I'm going to show you are not freshwater, but whatever, they're part of the group. Talk to each other for a quick second. You probably heard of some of these. Maybe you say, don't put on my pizza. So a lot of fish in this group are called bait fish by fishermen. They're just silver. They swim in their millions. You hook them with your hook. You throw it in the water to catch a bigger fish that you want to see or you want to eat. I think anchovies are particularly cool. Anchovies, just like paddlefish, just like whale sharks and basking sharks, are filter feeders. They open their mouth super wide and they filter feed plankton. That's what an anchovy does to eat. So they swim in their schools with their shut mouths. They look like they're the Joker, kind of like but then when they open their mouth, they've got a big old mouth. Sardines, herring, I bet these are words you've heard before. Shads are a big version of these fishes that migrates just like salmon, like up the Columbia. So we get shads up in the western part of Idaho that come up the Columbia River. So they come into fresh water, some of them. That's herrings and shads, sardines, anchovies. One thing I like about doing this is that a lot of these like words, like this word here, are words that you guys are like, oh, right, I know that word. And so it's just fun to give it all the context. Here's this gigantic, unbelievable group of freshwater fishes. A lot of these are Idaho fishes. I'll let you talk about it for a second. I would argue this group of fishes is like a good hallmark for like what a fish looks like. I'm hearing a lot of good conversation. Do we have any fun facts or fun stories about these fishes? These are very familiar fishes to people on land. Okay, so it's way worse. When we get to frogs, it's like way worse, but I love this so much. The limitations of humans trying to do things. Suckers, loaches, sucker loaches. That fish just gets called the other two fish, which I think is great. But look at those pelter and pectoral and pelvic fins. That's a little fish that can like suction up onto a rock. So in high moving water environments, it can like live very happily. Everybody knows goldfish, koi, things like that. Carp, which are invasive the world over, originally not everywhere. Suckers and minnows and daces these are some big time Idaho native freshwater fish diversity. These are fishes we definitely have. The four-eyed fish is a fantastic fish, again, a South American tropical fish. It's called the four-eyed fish because its lenses of its eyes are split into two, and it sits there with two of the lenses above the water and two of the lenses below the water. So it can hunt both ways. The four-eyed fish is a fantastic fish that has two eyeballs, but four like pupils. Fun. Here's another group of Asteriophysians that I bet you know something about. So this group of fish is very dominant in South American and African freshwater systems. You guys definitely know some of them. A lot of these are the very pretty coral reef fish, or sorry, aquarium fish. If you go to Lake McKees or whatever it is down on Yellowstone Avenue, a lot of them are going to be tetras and carassins that you like get for your fish tank because they're pretty. Tigerfish is a big sport fish in Africa that like river monster people like to go catch because it's got a #scary mouth. You guys probably know this fish, piranhas. In the South American freshwater systems, they are the flesh eaters. They swarm all around something. They're not as dangerous as you think. They almost never attack like living organisms that aren't other fishes. But if another fish gets injured, yeah, they disappear pretty quick. Get eaten by piranhas. The pacu and other fish like the pacu are cousins of piranhas. They have the exact same scary teeth. We're going to talk about them later, but those teeth are very flat and they eat fruits. They just eat fruits, but they're like piranhas. Many times you're going to see this word. This word is used when the fish is long. Doesn't mean it's a true eel. You already saw true eels, but the electric eel, the one that can actually hunt by shooting electrical currents and communicate by shooting electrical currents, is a South American fish in this group. And I will stop for today instead of going buck wild. And so we're in the middle of Asteriophysians. That's cool. I will see you guys on Monday at lab.
Good evening.